And if you don't even have a job in the first place, it's very hard to afford. So this bill would create a refundable tax credit in the amount of $2,000.
Please welcome John Paré.
I think it's very important to really internalize the high expectations for yourself. It's harder than you might think.
Director of Advocacy and Policy for the National Federation of the Blind.
And that was so rewarding to know that I could do something that I thought would be challenging for any person, blind or sighted, that I could successfully do that as a blind person, and that I had the skills and confidence to do that was something that helps you have confidence to do other things that you might think are going to be challenging as a blind person.
Interview conducted by Blindability's correspondent, Simon Bonenfant.
This is my 8th year that I have done Washington seminars. So in that time, I've seen a lot as well of great changes, and it's really advocacy at work of the American people.
Educating and advocating as a representative of the blindness community in Washington, D.C.
Something that I stressed to Congress this year was that these issues are issues for the blind to live full and independent lives.
It is the opportunity to do, not to talk to members of Congress, but it is the greatest opportunity you'll ever have to network with thousands of blind people from all over the country and really all over the world.
And now, please welcome John Paré and Simon Bonenfant. We hope you enjoy.
Hello everyone on Blindability. This is Simon Bonenfant here, and I got the chance to talk to John Paré, who works for the National Federation of the Blind as Director of Advocacy and Policy. John, how you doing today?
Fantastic. Glad to be here.
Thank you for talking with me. And we just wrapped up the 2020 Washington seminar in Washington, D.C., and it was a very successful seminar, to my knowledge. I had a very nice time and got to network and got to talk to a lot of congressmen in the state of Pennsylvania, where I'm from. So can you talk a little bit about this year's Washington seminar that we just had passed and how it went for you? And can you kind of just explain a little bit about the basic idea of Washington seminar as well?
Absolutely. So we try to get people from every state and every district in the United States to come pretty close to doing that. There's 435 members in the House. We get almost everyone represented and every state represented. And our goal is to come talk about issues that would improve the lives of blind Americans. I can go through the issues if you like here in a moment. Maybe talk a little bit about what we do. So we get a headquarters hotel. This year it was the Holiday Inn right near the Capitol. And we assemble there usually coming in on a Sunday. We have meetings all day Monday. We have a big kickoff meeting on Monday night. This year we had Chairman Bobby Scott, the chair of the House Education and Labor Committee, who was our featured speaker. He did a really nice job and talked about the Transformation to Competitive Employment Act. Then we had the bulk of our meetings on Tuesday, which you'll hear about. And then we had a reception with over 10 members of Congress over in the Senate Russell office building Tuesday night, more meetings on Wednesday, and then just a few meetings on Thursday for the larger states. It was a lot of fun, a lot of people there. I think we really helped communicate our message to Congress. It's nothing better than having the actual constituents come and talk to their actual members of Congress. Members of Congress are very interested in hearing from their constituents, and that's, I think, what is so exciting.
Oh, absolutely. And I've seen great changes come to pass. This is my 8th year that I have done Washington seminars. So in that time, I've seen a lot as well of great changes, and it's really advocacy at work of the American people.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I didn't know you would quite up to 8. Well, you're quite the veteran.
Yes. So, John, can you talk a little bit about the specific issues that we discussed this past seminar?
Sure. So the first one is the Access Technology Affordability Act. Problem here that this bill is trying to solve is the fact that access technology, this would be things like refreshable Braille displays, Braille note takers, Braille embossers, screen reading software, maybe some of the high-end magnification equipment, is all very expensive. And this equipment is needed for education, employment, and independent living. And especially we focused in on employment, the fact that to look for a job nowadays, to search the job aggregators on the internet, and find a job that might be something you'd like to apply for, and then to go through the application process really requires having this equipment at home and using, your computer, possibly with a refreshable braille display or a screen reading software or maybe screen magnification software. And if you don't even have a job in the first place, it's very hard to afford. So this bill would create a refundable tax credit in the amount of $2,000 that could be spent all in the first year or spread over 3 years, specifically for blind people as defined in the IRS code right now. Blindness is defined in the IRS code for the kind of access technology equipment that I've just described, so that you could get that. And even if you don't have a job and therefore weren't paying taxes, the fact that it's refundable means you'd still get a refund. So if you spend $1,000, you could still get a check back in the amount of $1,000 to sort of reimburse you for that purchase. And we think this would really help improve education and employment opportunities for blind Americans. And it seems like Congress is agreeing with us, because we picked up probably a record number of co-sponsors in just 1 week. We picked up 14 co-sponsors in the House and 2 in the Senate on this particular bill. So we're up to 63 co-sponsors in the House and 17 co-sponsors in the Senate. So we're very excited about that. In fact, the sponsor of the bill in the House, Congressman Mike Thompson from California, spoke at our congressional reception Tuesday night. He is the chair of the Tax Policy Subcommittee within Ways and Means. That's the Committee of Jurisdiction. And then in the Senate, we have Senator Bozeman, a senior senator from Arkansas, who is the bill sponsor, and Senator Cardin happens to be my senator right here in Maryland, who is the lead co-sponsor. So that's really the issue and kind of where we stand on trying to move this bill forward.
Great. And can you describe the other issues that we were discussing?
Sure. Then I'll go right into the second issue, which is the greater access and independence through non-visual access technology, and that's the GAIN Act. This bill is working to solve the problem of 3 categories of equipment. The first category would be medical equipment, home-based medical equipment. The fact that so much of that equipment is not non-visually accessible. It's built using new flat screen type screens and menus and other things that are not tactilely accessible, and which is ironic because diabetic retinopathy is a leading cause of blindness. So the idea that you might need to use to monitor your diabetes at home as a blind person is very likely. And to not have the very equipment you need to be accessible is just wrong. So we want to try to have standards developed. The bill authorizes the Access Board, which has a lot of expertise in developing these types of standards, to create standards and then propagate them. Companies would have a number of years to then have their equipment conform to those standards. It wouldn't be very expensive, doesn't require any kind of retrofitting. It would only be future equipment. And the idea, if you mass produce equipment that's already very technologically based, to add things like voice or other techniques to make it accessible really is a very minor additional cost, but with a major benefit to consumers. The second category, so that's the first category. The second category would be your exercise equipment, maybe to help make sure you don't get sick in the first place. So to have accessible exercise equipment, especially in the home. And then the third would be your home appliances, and that would be things like a microwave, a washer, a dryer, your stove. As you know, these things continually have less tactile. The old-fashioned tactile knobs that used to be relatively accessible have been replaced by these flat-screen interactive displays where you have to answer a question and then based on that, answer another question and another question, and those aren't accessible. But it wouldn't be hard to add the kind of interface that you have on a voting machine or an ATM machine or your iPhone, where there is an earplug or just a little teeny speaker where if the questions being asked are made accessible, and then there's some slight tactile interface that knows what button to push. So really that can dramatically improve independent living, exercise, overall health, and we hope that that bill will get passed. It's introduced currently in the House by Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky of Chicago. She's the chair of the relevant subcommittee. This bill is assigned to the Energy and Commerce Committee, House Energy and Commerce Committee. Congressman Frank Pallone is the chair of that committee, and she's a subcommittee chair. Currently, there's 13 co-sponsors on that, and that also benefited from a substantial increase as a result of Washington Seminar and the work that people did to talk about that legislation. I can keep rolling right into Aim High if you'd like.
Yeah, sure.
All right. So the third issue has to do in higher ed education. So accessible instructional material in higher education is the name. Our nickname is Aim High. And that bill is intended to solve the problem of inaccessible educational platforms, textbooks, and other lab software that you have, all the different digital software that is being incorporated into the overall higher education process, and trying to make sure that that's accessible. Currently, the law requires that, so that's not the problem. The problem really is that schools and developers aren't quite sure what they need to do to make those things accessible. And that's what this bill aims to solve, to try to explain what needs to be done to make those things in an educational setting accessible. So the bill authorizes the creation of a commission, a 19-person commission that would be appointed by Congress, partly by Congress and partly by the Department of Education, and it would comprise of people with disabilities, and then members from schools, members of publishers, and also technology companies. And the bill outlines a fairly specific distribution of types of expertise to make up the 19-person board, and exactly whether certain members are appointed by the House and the Senate and some by the Secretary of Education. You'd have this whole commission that would really be the right complement of people to try to come up with these, really will be informative guidelines of what needs to be done. And then that would be propagated out to schools so that they could do a better job with their education, their procurement of technology. Developers could do a better job even making the technology accessible in the first place, and really improve the whole educational system. The bill is supported by 14 different disability groups, kind of the who's who of disability groups, and by the American Council on Education, which represents virtually every school in America. So the schools are for it, the students, by virtue of disabled students, are for it, and the publishers, the American Association of Publishers, is for it. So in effect, the textbook companies and so forth, and even the Software Industry and Information Association is for it. They're the ones who do some of these other platforms. So virtually every stakeholder is for this. So I'm hoping, and we're hoping, that this bill will move through Congress very rapidly when there's virtually no cost and virtually complete support for it. It is sponsored in the House by Congressman Rowe from Tennessee and co-sponsored by Congressman Courtney of Connecticut. It's up to 12 co-sponsors, but it hasn't been introduced for very long. In the Senate, it's sponsored by Senator Warren and then co-sponsored by Senators Sullivan and Ernst, who happen to be Republicans, and also by Senator Bennett and Smith. The other names jumping in my head for a second, but they're both Democrats. So it's very bipartisan in both the House and the Senate. And as a result, the other senator, Senator Tester, the other Democrat. So there's two Republicans, two Democrats. So it's perfectly bipartisan. And so we hope that will move through the House and the Senate and get to the president's desk, hopefully within the next couple of months. So those are the three issues that really could be described as the categories of one, education, one substantially employment related, and one independent living related. Those tends to be the areas that blind Americans would benefit most from help from Congress in terms of laws that would improve our educational opportunities, our employment opportunities, and help us live independent lives, no matter what age we are, but maybe especially for older Americans.
That's great. And something that I stressed in my appointments with the Congress this year was that, these issues are issues for the blind to live full and independent lives and daily lives. And this is really what the NFB philosophy is about, living successfully and equally and participating in the same way as all the other citizens. So can you go into a little bit more for those who may not know a detail of the NFB's general philosophy and things of that nature?
Sure, sure. Well, one way we like to sum it up is we say that the National Federation of the Blind knows that blindness is not the characteristic that defines you or your future. Every day, we raise the expectations of blind people because low expectations create obstacles between blind people and our dreams. We believe that you can live the life you want and that blindness is not what holds you back. And that if you have the tools, technology, and training, and that people are open to integration and being competitive employment, that we can, live the lives we want. So we work very hard to make sure that people get rigorous training. We operate 3 model training centers where you can go, you live there, and you get very thorough training. From 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., you go through intensive classes, and these would include things like Braille, orientation and mobility, so you learn to effectively use a white cane and get around complicated settings in terms of whether it's a suburban, rural, city, bus, different transportation, different types of street crossings, so that you can really do what we would describe as structured discovery in terms of traveling around, traveling being the word here we're using for really walking around with the white cane. And then you would learn to effectively use screen reading software so that you can use your computer. There's no reason that the person on the other end of an email wouldn't even know that you're blind. You're going to be able to bounce back and forth emails just as effectively as anyone else. Of course, we don't believe that being blind is anything to be ashamed of. In fact, we believe that using the word blind is perfectly fine. It's not something that you'd want to shy away from. I'm a blind person. That's not negative. It's just a fact. And whether or not you're totally blind or might have some residual vision really is not the question. I do have a little residual vision, but it's not enough for me to operate as a sighted person. I have to use screen reading software because I really can't see the screen. I have to use a white cane, otherwise I'd fall off the curb or worse. And I use NFB Newsline to listen to the newspaper, and I use VoiceOver on my iPhone. So that's just some of the things that help me live in the same way, with the same level of effectiveness that other people do. But a lot of that is you got to make sure that you have the training and that you have your own personal high expectations for yourself, and that hopefully society has high expectations for us as blind people, so that we can be integrated and live in an integrated and equal way as everyone else. And that's what makes our own individual lives so rewarding, but also contributes to, the rest of society and to our local community and our city, our state, and our country.
That's great. Now, can you describe your life and a brief summary of kind of leading up to your role in the NFB, a brief summary of your journey to get where you are now?
Absolutely. So I am 60 years old, and when I was about 35, so about 25 years ago, so I was sighted, and about 25 years ago, I suddenly started losing my sight to something called cone rod retina degeneration. It's one of the many retina degeneration diseases that one can get. It just happened that I got it. It's not hereditary. It just happened. And so my eyesight started to deteriorate. It's not curable. It's not treatable. And it just results in a slow but steady deterioration. And it was sad, especially at first, as I began to do less and had a good job, but I started being less and less successful at that job because I wasn't able to do things. I didn't know any blind people. I didn't know how people who were losing their eyesight did things. I had never heard of the National Federation of the Blind. And in fact, in 2001, eventually got to the point where I lost my job and was unemployed. I didn't think I'd ever work again, and I didn't think I'd be able to. I didn't know how I would work again. I didn't have any skills to operate as a blind person. I lived at the time in Virginia, and I moved to Tampa, Florida, close to where my parents lived, because I thought it'd be nice to live close to them. I could sit at home and do nothing from anywhere. So I decided to do that from Tampa, Florida. And I was sitting home and probably kind of feeling sorry for myself and not really doing anything. I liked to listen to the newspaper. I discovered NFB Newsline, and I listened to the newspaper all the time. NFB Newsline is a service offered by NFB, the National Federation of the Blind. It allows you to listen using a synthetic voice to today's paper today. So you could listen like to today's New York Times or USA Today or Wall Street Journal and so forth. So I did use it and I really liked it. And eventually, after maybe 6 months, I thought, this is such a great service. I wonder kind of what the NFB is about. So I did some research and found out that the National Federation of Blind is the largest organization of blind people in the United States, and they have chapters, and they meet once a month, and there were 700 local chapters, and I did some more research, and I thought, oh my gosh, there's a chapter that meets about a mile from where I live there in Tampa. And oh my gosh, they've got a meeting this coming Saturday. So I went to the meeting, and I met all these blind people. It was the first time I met some other blind people as a blind person myself, but they weren't sitting at home doing nothing. They had jobs and families and were active. And I thought, wow, I want to be more like you guys. So I threw myself into the National Federation of Blind, and particularly in NFB Newsline, because I liked it so much and I was learned to help operate it for the state of Florida. And as a result of that, I started meeting a lot of National Federation of Blind leaders and eventually started meeting the leaders in Baltimore. And I went to my first Washington seminar and met more leaders and really got hooked on the whole thing. And I realized I had made a huge mistake, that I could be a successful, employable, happy blind person. And pretty soon, I think as a result of my sales skills and other skills that I had from my previous job, was actually offered a job at the National Federation of the Blind, which I, of course, jumped at. So in 2004, I started working at the National Federation of Blind, and sort of lo and behold, or ironically, and to my greatest happiness, my job was to help run NFB Newsline for the whole country, which had brought me into the NFB, and certainly that was where my heart laid in that. And I love Newsline, and I loved working at the NFB. I was so happy to be doing all that. And I got more training, and certainly now I was surrounded by National Federation of Blind leadership. And after a while, I got moved to another job having to do with public relations. And then I was moved to my current job, which is the Executive Director of Advocacy and Policy, where I primarily focus on this type of legislative advocacy. So my career here at the NFB, and it's really not so much that I have to have worked at the NFB. I think the idea is the NFB helped me realize, and I hope other blind people realize, that with the training and the attitude, a lot of, as you hear from my story, a lot of it was my personal misunderstanding that I couldn't do better than I was doing. And when I learned that and then got better skills training, the combination of those two really helped me reach my full potential, which I'm so appreciative to everyone and all, and meeting other NFB members just like yourself. Every time I meet other people like you doing this podcast and doing all the things you do and having gone to 8 Washington seminars, your success rubs off on me, and I'm constantly renewed, and maybe this podcast helps renew the people listening to it.
Absolutely. And how was your family and friends and supporters? How were they throughout your whole journey?
I think people saw that I was much happier and was meeting really my potential. And so people were very supportive, and I created a new network of friends. So my old friends, but then were supportive. And of course, I stay in touch with them and my family. And then my new network of friends is something that I treasure.
Absolutely. So we usually ask this question, what advice would you give to a transition age student going into high school, college, or the workplace, or someone who is newly blinded? What advice would you say is most important and valuable to you that you would like to pass on to other blind Americans?
All right, sure. A couple of things. One of the things that's really worked for me is making sure that I have friends that are successful blind people, successful blind mentors. For me, that's been all people within the National Federation of the Blind, and learning from them and knowing how important it is to kind of network and to seek out and appreciate blind mentors. I think it's very important to really internalize the high expectations for yourself. It's harder than you might think, but if you work at it, you can do it. And then to get the skills training that would be at one of the 3 National Federation of Blind model training centers. There's one in Louisiana, there's one in Minnesota, and there's one in Colorado. I'm sort of surrounded by this kind of training every day. So I have not gone specifically to a training center for the full training period, but I did spend 3 weeks as a traditional student going to the Louisiana Center for the Blind, and it was it was fun. I learned a lot, and I can't say enough good things about it. No matter how much almost even if you already think, well, I already know Braille pretty well, and I already get around with the white cane pretty well, when you finish this, you'll be expert. And even if you bring some of those skills to the table, I doubt you bring all the skills that you can learn at one of these centers. And doing that, especially as you described, when you're younger, transition age youth, it's something that will benefit you your entire life. So I urge people to get this really thorough skills training. Probably one of the things I did at the end of my 3 weeks is I really wanted to do one of the occasional weekend activities they do is they go rock climbing, either frequently outdoor rock climbing, but I had missed that. But I asked if I could just go do indoor rock climbing, which I had never done. And so I approached the facility, wearing sleep shades and my white cane, went in, got on the harness, climbed the wall, got all the way to the top, rappelled back down. And that was all totally as a blind person. And that was so rewarding to know that I could do something that I thought would be challenging for any person, blind or sighted, that I could successfully do that as a blind person, and that I had the skills and confidence to do that was something that helps you have confidence to do other things that you might think are going to be challenging as a blind person. So I think that's the kind of thing, wherever you are on your journey, know that other people have been sort of at your spot, and that we urge you to keep moving forward. It's really exciting.
Oh, I think it's great. And I think one of the great things about the NFB, as you can speak on as well, and as you have spoken on, is the community of how we have so many people, federationists in our movement to learn from, mentor, and just have as friends. So
Absolutely. And I hope that people listening come to your 9th Washington seminar.
And we have next big gathering is our national convention. You want to give listeners quick dates on that if you have them?
Yes. Okay. I don't have the dates right in front of me, but if you go to the www.nfb.org, there'll be a /national convention, or just grab the link off the homepage to the national convention. This year it's going to be in Houston, Texas, mid-July. It's anticipated to be probably the largest convention we've ever had. It is the opportunity to do, not to talk to members of Congress, but it is the greatest opportunity you'll ever have to network with thousands of blind people from all over the country and really all over the world. We usually have a number of international visitors who come, and the number of special interest division meetings occur. There's usually 30 or 40 meetings of that, different educational things, the plenary sessions. There's nothing more exciting than President Riccobono's sort of State of the Union speech, his presidential report that he does always the first plenary day in the first session in the afternoon, where you get to hear what's happened over the previous year. That's always so exciting and inspirational to hear about the successes the National Federation of the Blind's had. So that's, for me, his presidential report is one of the most exciting talks that occur at the convention. Tied with that would be his banquet speech, where he gives more of a philosophical talk about where we are in blindness and where we are, where we're going, and really analyzes the subject in a really insightful and incisive way. And it's really exciting. It's part of the banquet that we have, which is typically the last night of the convention, and that is something that you would not want to miss. And it will be in Houston at a really nice hotel where we have an incredibly discounted rate. So it's really worth taking the time and effort to go there. And I think once you've been at a convention, you'll realize just how much you can learn, and you won't want to miss another one. Well,
thank you, John, for talking with us on blind abilities. You're a very inspiring person, and really admire the work you do in the Federation, and keep up to the great work. And here's to another year of legislative advocacy on behalf of the blind. So thank you for talking with the listeners, and have a very nice day.
Thank you so much for having me.
Cool. Very good.
All right. That was fantastic. Honored to be here.
big thank you goes out to Simon Bonenfant for doing what he does, going out there, asking the big questions, getting the answers, sharing the news, and being there on the spot. So thank you, Simon. And thank you, John Paré, for what you're doing at the National Federation of the Blind and for all blind and visually impaired people around the globe. A big shout out to Chichao for his beautiful music. You can follow Chichao on Twitter at El Chichao. For more podcasts with a blindness perspective, check us out on the web at www.blindabilities.com, on Twitter at blindabilities, and be sure to download the free Blindabilities app from the App Store. That's 2 words, Blind Abilities. Check out the Facebook group Blind Abilities Community, where you can share, learn, advise, and enhance the opportunities for yourself and others. You can also check out the assistive technology community for the blind and visually impaired, as well as the group Career Resources for the blind and visually impaired. And for the entertaining side of news and technology from a blindness perspective, be sure to check out the Facebook group That Blind Tech Show. I want to thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed. And until next time, bye-bye.
When we share
what we see
through each other's eyes, we can then begin to bridge the gap between
the limited expectations
and the
realities
of blind abilities.
The realities of blind abilities.
For more podcasts with a blindness perspective, check us out on the web at www.blindabilities.com, on Twitter at blindabilities, download our app from the App Store, Blindabilities, that's 2 words, or send us an email at info@blindabilities.com. Thanks for listening.